Greetings all, FerrariMan601 here. Welcome back to another 1/18th scale model car review of this, the 2017 Mercedes-AMG F1 W08 EQ Power Plus. Yes, that is a mouthful. It may be one of the longest names for a racing car ever, and well, this may be one of the longest racing cars ever. We'll get into that. Of course, this car, despite its atrociously long name, it is one of the most dominant Formula One cars in all of Grand Prix racing history, certainly among the most dominant when we narrow our historical perspective to the 2010s decade, which of course is now in its last year of 2019. This car, of course, fielded in 2017 by the Mercedes-AMG F1 team, driven by Lewis Hamilton, pictured here in the cockpit, and Valtteri Bottas. It really does not deserve any more accolades than I've already given it. It's one of the most dominant Grand Prix cars in history, and it is, of course, among the most dominant of the 2010s. It's only superseded by its relatives, its compatriots, built by Mercedes-AMG. These guys have absolutely dominated Formula One since 2014 with the introduction of the turbo hybrid power unit era, and yes, we can talk until the cows come home about whether or not it's a good idea or a bad idea, but this is what Formula One has become, and this is one of its premier design examples. This car taking the Drivers' Championship and the Constructors' Championship in 2017, fourth for team and driver. Fourth Constructors' Championship for Mercedes, and the fourth Drivers' Championship in the career of one Lewis Hamilton. What can we say about this car other than it is an absolute tour de force, technically and design-wise, in terms of aerodynamics and part integration, and of course, the driving talent behind it? Yeah, everything came together in pretty much a perfect way to give Mercedes that double championship in the drivers and constructors. Spearheading the Mercedes design effort behind the W08, Aldo Costa as engineering director, James Allison as technical director, Mike Elliott as technology director, and Jeff Willis as director of engineering process. Yes, interesting titles there for all of those guys, but certainly they came together and they built this, which turned out to be by far the best car of the 2017 season, and of course it was good enough to win the Constructors' Championship. In terms of the construction on this car, well, we're talking about pretty conventional stuff as far as Formula One cars go. A molded carbon fiber honeycomb composite for the monocoque, that includes the cockpit where the driver is sitting, as well as the front crash structure onto which the front nose cone, the very long front nose cone, as we'll look at a little bit more closely later on, mounts. Suspension, carbon fiber double wishbone push rod in the front, and a carbon fiber double wishbone pull rod in the rear. And again, we'll take a closer look a little bit later. The dimensions on this car, well, this is one of the longer cars ever seen on a Grand Prix racetrack, and the dimensions read a little bit like this. In keeping with the 2017 regulations, where these cars were facelifted a lot, it is exactly 2,000 millimeters wide, exactly 2 meters wide. That's 79 inches in American money. It is 950 millimeters high and 37 inches in American money. And the wheelbase, that's the length between the front and rear axles, not including any overhanging bodywork, as there is a significant amount of, at least on the front end. Wheelbase, 3,726 millimeters, or 146.7 inches. Yeah, this is a big car, and in particular, it's a long one. It's 3.7 meters long. That's pretty substantial, I would say. The engine lurking underneath that engine cover, it is the Mercedes-AMG F1 M08 EQ Power Plus. It's a 1.6-liter V6 with a 90-degree bank angle of its two-cylinder banks there of 3 each. It, of course, is turbocharged, and they don't tell us all that much more other than that. The regulations limit its crankshaft to 15,000 RPM. It is mid-mounted, right behind the fuel tank there, which itself is right behind the driver, and it can only drive the rear wheels. Of course, the engine's not the only motive power in these late model Formula One cars. What else do we have? Well, we've got an electric motor, two of them actually. We have a motor generator unit kinetic, an MGUK. That is an electric motor that is spun up off of the rear axle. That's generating power as the car is decelerating, so waste energy under normal circumstances harnessed, and that goes into a battery pack, which is hidden someplace in the bottom section of the car. Second electric motor, and this one is tied to the turbocharger, a motor generator unit heat, or MGUH, as we have been hearing in the TV broadcast since 2014. That motor is spun up off of the turbocharger. Mercedes obviously have a very effective solution as to where they're mounting their turbo and the MGUH. That motor, much like the MGUK, can take waste energy from the spinning action of the turbocharger and convert that into electrical charge, where it can be put that into a battery pack, or it could take that harvested energy from the battery pack and send it back through a common shaft on the turbocharger and spin up the turbo to eliminate turbo lag. The transmission in this car, aside from the hybrid systems, it is a Mercedes and X-Track 8-speed semi-automatic sequential gearbox, 8 forward gears, 1 reverse gears, for a total of 9 drive gears in the gearbox. That's pretty substantial. Of course, all the cars are running these 8-speed units nowadays. The batteries in this thing, Mercedes designed and manufactured in-house. They're lithium-ion batteries, basically the same things you'd find in a laptop and even the camera with which I'm filming this video. Overall, formula weight, 728 kilograms, that's 1,605 pounds. The fuel, Petronas, as we can see here by the branding on the car. Lubricants, also provided by Petronas Syntium. Brakes, Carbon Industry, carbon ceramic brake discs, pads, and calipers, developed by Brembo. The rear brakes are brake-by-wire. The tires, as is mandatory in Formula One with a controlled tire, they are supplied by Pirelli. For the dry weather slick compounds, they are the Pirelli P0. For the wet compounds, not pictured here, those are the Pirelli Cinturato. Wheels, OZ Forged Magnesium, 13-inch diameter, both front and rear. In particular, rear wheels have become a talking point throughout 2017 and 2018. We'll see if that continues through 2019, but rather conventional rear wheels seen here. Competition history on this car. Of course, entered by Mercedes-AMG in 2017, driven by Lewis Hamilton and Valtteri Bottas. The car made its debut in the 2017 Australian Grand Prix. It took its first victory in China that year, took its last victory in Abu Dhabi, which happened to be the final round of 2017, and out of 20 races entered, it managed to win 12 of them. It scored podium places 26 times, 15 pole positions, and 9 fastest laps, which of course were enough to net this car the Constructors' Championship in 2017, and Lewis Hamilton his 4th Drivers' Championship. Of course, Hamilton has since gone on to win one more Drivers' Championship. He's now a 5-time world champion. This was 4 for car number 44, Lewis Hamilton. Now let's take a little bit of a closer look at the model itself. This, of course, is 1/18th scale by Mini Champs. In particular, this model is done after the car that won the Spanish Grand Prix. So there is your subject matter right there. The Spanish Grand Prix is always an interesting round of the season. It is the traditional start of the European rounds of the championship. Nowadays, of course, they have Azerbaijan, which in the past has hosted the European Grand Prix. Azerbaijan is in Asia. Anyway, Spanish Grand Prix, that's the subject matter for this model. And also, I've taken the opportunity to take a look at this car now on the 18th of January when I'm making this video. I don't know when I'll release it. Obviously, it won't be the 18th of January, but I've just received this one in the mail today on the 18th of January. So, believe it or not, this is actually my first close-up examination of it. Of course, I've taken it out of the box and made sure it was okay, but other than that, I really have not taken that close of a look at it. So, we get to discover all of the little intricacies of this car together. This also might mean that I could miss something, but I'm going to do my best. Of course, we're all well familiar with this car because we've watched it race in all likelihood if you're watching this video. So we do know generally what to look for, but it's a completely different thing when you've actually got an accurate representation of one of these things in your hands, and you can take a look at everything, and there's no depth of field to worry about from whatever photographer took the pictures you've been poring over all off season. Yeah, we're going to take a look at this thing. First off, it's a Mini Champs car, so those of you who collect these things, you know what you're looking at when you get a Mini Champs car. You're going to get something that is very well put together, something that's going to feel nice in your hand, something that's going to withstand the test of time. I do have several Mini Champs models that are now well over 10 years old, and, well, they're still looking pretty good, so I have very good prognoses for the fate of this car as well. Nonetheless, let's take a look at what Mini Champs have done with this. We mentioned the front-end bodywork on this car and that particularly long proboscis-like front nose cone there. That is what Mercedes did. Mercedes, very much a lone wolf in this style of nose design in 2017. I remember Toro Rosso did something similar, but aside from that, most of the other teams ran those so-called finger noses or thumb noses with that very small appendage drooping down from the tip of the nose. Mercedes deciding not to do that. Rather, they did something rather radical with their front nose solution. You can see the initial profile of the nose that immediately faces the onrushing air. Very thin. It does thicken up a bit as you go up toward the monocoque proper, where the nose actually mounts up with the front end of the chassis. So that was an interesting solution. Also something that we didn't see initially when this car was launched with those press photos, but you can see right down here on either side of the nose, you can see this very unique and Mercedes developed idea across the sides of the nose there. We've started to call this a cape, as in, yeah, the piece of cloth that Superman wears. It kind of resembles a cape, I suppose, if Superman were flying inverted, and, well, yeah, there it is. Obviously, the rationale of what they're doing with this cape is they're trying to funnel air down toward the T-tray, which is on the bottom section of the car, and we'll get a better look at that area a little bit later on. But you can definitely see that this long and thin nose, it's splitting the airflow into two predominant flows as it's going underneath the car into the very critical midline aerodynamics, which of course is very important for downforce generation. The instant one of these cars runs into the air is the same instant wherein they start trying to work that airflow to a competitive advantage. Pulling away from all of that, the front wing, these wings in 2017 and 2018, they became so incredibly complicated. I remember when we took a look at Formula Hybrid 2017 in Assetto Corsa, as well as their 2018 car, the two wonderful cars from Racing Studio. Well, we marveled at the front wing on that thing, and this is no different. Mercedes obviously making a very sophisticated wing. They're trying their best to generate vortices with all of these different cascade elements and little flick-ups, because if you can create those low pressure zones around those front tires, you can effectively negate the drag that having the tire out in the airstream creates. So really, that is what they've done with this wing. Of course, they're trying to generate traditional downforce with it as well, and Mini Champs have done their best to try to recreate the very, very complicated geometries in here. Just taking a look at the silver and green elements of the wing there, we have the main plane, and then we've got 1, 2, 3 main flap elements, and then moving outboard toward the cascades, we've got that first fin, which itself has 2 elements, and then farther outboard, we've got this forward cascade element, which has got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 elements on it, and then further outboard and slightly rear still, we can see the inner surface of the front wing end fence, which has its own little flick up, and then the outer surface of the front wing end fence, which has got that inverted U channel there, and then on the extreme outboard side, another inverted U channel, the end plate itself, and then a further 3, 4 elements trying to sculpt that airflow around the front tire to create those vortices to try and negate the drag effects of that front tire as it's spinning its way through the airstream. That's pretty ridiculous. In terms of what Minichamps have done to model this wing, you can see the separate flap elements there in the main plane. It is one continuously cast piece of plastic, but you can see that they've painted the slot gap areas black, so it looks like they're separate elements there, but they're really not. It's one piece. However, the cascade elements, there's really no way to fake that. You've got to make those their own elements, and indeed they are. They don't have any sort of carbon fiber texturing on them as the real wing most likely would have, but I think they've done a pretty reasonable job given how complicated this area on the car is. So hats off to you there, Minichamps. Also down here right on the underside of the nose tip, you can barely even see this with your eye. My camera does have the luxury of magnifying things quite a lot. You can see those two little nostrils there. Obviously, that's an air intake on the front side of the nose. That is for driver cooling. They're trying to funnel air toward the cockpit. In the neutral center section of the front wing, you can see down through here. The light's going to wash that out a little bit. Here we go. FIA, action for road safety, right through there. Maybe we can make it a little bit brighter for you. There we go. And then that central hatch area, probably housing some instrumentation. Very, very cool. And just for you technical folks out there in terms of photography, my camera is about, I don't know, 1.5 inches away from the nose there right now. Yeah, that's how close in we can get, and that's how good the detail still looks on this car. Minichamps, fantastic job. Obviously, right on the front and center here, there's your Mercedes silver star emblem there, your 3-pointed circle with the star motif, which is actually how Mercedes filed their copyright on that logo. Petronas Cintium, that's for your lubricants. Pirelli, Qualcomm, telecom sponsor, of course, and then moving up the front section of the car. Notice, right forward of the 44 there, we have got ourselves a little depression inside. What is that, pray tell? Well, think about the Ferrari F2008. Consequently, at the Spanish Grand Prix in 2008, what did they debut on that car? Well, they debuted an S-duct. This is a duct which is fed through an opening on the bottom side of the nose cone, and then that duct exhausts out through here in this NACA-style exhaust duct. This is designed to produce more front-end downforce without creating too much drag on the front end. Ferrari obviously came up with that idea in 2008. It was successful. Many other teams have copied it since, none the least of which are Mercedes in 2017. Nice job. Moving through the midsection of the front end, we're now into the monocoque area proper. This is around the cockpit quite obviously, but the complexity does not go away here. In fact, it gets worse. Yeah, there's your front suspension. That's the most conventional part of this car. Double wishbone push rod. You can see the upper and lower wishbones and the push rods going up through there at an angle into the dampers, which are inside the top side of the chassis. However, as we move our rears through the midsection of the car here, just look at this. Barge boards. Remember barge boards from the mid-2000s, Ferrari F2003, 2004, 2005, etc.? We always marveled at those barge boards. They looked so cool, and they were wonderful billboards for cigarette companies. Well, they're still wonderful billboards for cigarette companies, but cigarette companies can't be in Formula One anymore because rules. Therefore, barge boards are strictly aerodynamic devices once again. Have a look at the complexity through here. Trying to zoom in as close as I can without losing our focus, and just look at all of that. You see that bottom side serrated edge. You might be inclined to think that somehow this model was dropped and it just mangled the floor section. No, that's actually how it's supposed to be. All of those serrations, you can see how they rise up gradually and then they very sharply just drop right off, almost like coming off the edge of a cliff. Well, it's forcing the air to fall off the edge of a cliff, and as the air immediately loses that attachment to the adjacent surface, Quanda effect, rearing its ugly head yet again, it tends to fall and then as it falls, you immediately get a low pressure side relative to the inflow. Therefore, you get a vortex that forms. And you can also see inboard toward the vertical element of the barge board, you can see that we have these vertical strakes here, or pylons, or whatever you want to call them. They are trying to steer the flow of those vortices toward the center of the car. Looking around at the main element of the barge board now, this is much more conventional. This is something that would look not too out of place on the F2004, for example, but you can see the profile of it. It is still sculpted just as you would expect something like this to be, but yes, it is very, very complicated. Above that, you can see this carbon flying buttress type thing. This is a Canard Wing. Also, remember Ferrari in the mid-2000s, F2007 at the French Grand Prix, I remember they debuted those Canard Wings. This is a Canard Wing, very much like that, a little bit lower and a little bit farther forward than what we saw on the Ferrari F2007, but this car and that one are two very different designs, and, well, they put their Canard Wings in two different places. This one obviously is also quite large given the increased length of this car, but same function. It's a Canard Wing. They're trying to condition the air as it is heading in toward the radiator ducts, which of course are right there. Shining the light inside the radiator duct, you can see that we don't really have any detail inside there of a radiator matrix, but you can see just how narrow Mercedes made that almost slot gap of a radiator duct opening. Obviously, this is trying to minimize drag, and of course, your V6 engine doesn't have the same cooling requirements as a larger engine like a V8 or a V10 or even a V12. Therefore, you can deal with less air going through there. Since these engines are also turbocharged, they don't need as much intake air, because the turbo is compressing that air, making it denser, making that intake charge much more effective. Even though the engines are still fed from the overhead snorkel that we can see right behind the driver's head, and nice little detail that many champs have done to integrate the roll structure inside the snorkel, just as the real car had done. The turbo is taking its air from there, so even though you don't necessarily need a ram air effect like they sort of used with the V12s, V10s, and V8s back in the good days, they still use that snorkel. It is effective. They also use it a lot for cooling nowadays as well. The opening, as you can see there on the Mercedes, it doesn't need to be that wide. They are also doing other things with that air, both aerodynamically as well as for cooling. It is not just engine air intake anymore. Pulling back a little bit, back toward the top side of the front end, you can see this very small aerial, this antenna aerial there. It is incredibly thin. I would say, to my eye, it is about the same thickness as 2 or 3 strands of hair. That is incredibly thin. It's definitely the thinnest antenna that I've ever seen on a model car. And there it is. It's really thin. And it's there. And it's an antenna, and I've talked about it for too long. Moving back toward the cockpit area, here's where we start to get into business in terms of more conventional details. There is Lewis Hamilton in the cockpit. His helmet there, recreated quite nicely. Once we can focus on it again. Yes, there we go. Lewis Hamilton's helmet, nice sponsorship details. The number 44, Bose, Monster Energy, blah, 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 blah. On the back there, Hamilton. Yes. Cockpit, steering wheel. Very nice steering wheel detail here. You can see that LCD on the center section of the wheel, nicely rendered. There's no decal on that in terms of trying to display any information. They're not trying to project a gear display or anything on there, which might have been cool, but it's pretty good. That's what the Mercedes steering wheel looked like in 2017, so I'll take it. Also, a detail on this car. It's a little difficult to see because it's transparent, but you can see the jagged edges right above the cockpit opening on the forward section. That's the little windscreen, and you can see, just like what Mercedes are doing here on the barge boards, they're trying to generate vortices with their cockpit windscreen. That's how obsessive-compulsive these engineers get, and well, obviously it was successful. So those jagged edges that we saw from those onboard shots, well, it's here on the model as well, and it's absolutely fantastic, and I can't get enough of it. Mini Champs, what are you doing? Get a life. Also on the cockpit, those of you who have played Gran Turismo Sport, which I have not, and I don't have plans to do, you can see the little flow modifiers just ahead of the cockpit wing mirrors. So we've got two little winglets, and then we have the mirrors proper. So that's interesting. I don't remember seeing that on any other car in 2017, but my memory might be betraying me. Speaking of more winglets, we talked about the radiator inlets. Well, this is just a rears of them and slightly above, and you can see turning vane detail. Now we have 3 turning vane elements, 1, 2, 3, moving from front to rear. The largest of which is connected via this flying buttress section to the cockpit, to the side of the monocoque there, just outboard of the cockpit surround. Yes, it is incredibly complicated. I don't know if I have another model car that is this complicated in terms of aerodynamic detail, but there it is. You can even see, not only do you have the turning vanes detailed as well as they are, but you even have the little stays, the little carbon buttress, it's plastic here obviously, that holds all 3 of them together just through the center of your frame there. You can see that arc shaped device. Yeah, that's a structural element that's actually holding the turning vanes together. It's wild. It's absolutely wild. Going back topside here, you can see these little louvers on either side of the rear side of the cockpit. This is for cooling, quite obviously. If I had to hazard a guess, I'd say it's to cool the lithium-ion battery pack, which is mounted, generally speaking, just beneath the fuel tank, about as low down on the car as they can get, because they're very heavy components, they're very dense, and therefore you want to keep the center of gravity as low as possible, so they try to mount them as low as they can, and one of the lowest places on this car is underneath the fuel tank. Those batteries do operate at high temperatures, therefore they need to be cooled actively. You can definitely tell that they're funneling air through the radiators there to cool the batteries, in addition to cooling all the more conventional components on the car, and that air needs to be exhausted. Why not exhaust it right there, in and out, quick as you like. Moving back across the rear of the engine cover now, you can see Mercedes AMG EQ Power Plus with the sponsorship graphics there. Also great paint on this model, I've got to say. All the little speckles there in it, do not adjust your set, that is real. And as well as the shark fin, which unfortunately was banned for 2018, and I don't think we're going to see that anytime again soon, but you can see the shark fin detail, including the little exhaust chimney there. Remember we were talking about how they're using the snorkel for cooling in addition to engine air intake? Well, there's the cooling exhaust on top of the shark fin there. So there you go. And on the very rear of the shark fin there is the T-wing, or the TV antennas, as some people were calling them in 2017. These were also banned. I liked these as well. I think it was kind of fun watching the onboard shots, looking back toward the rear wing and seeing the shark fins and the T-wings back here gyrating about like crazy as the cars bounded over the curbs. It really let you know that there were actually quite some significant forces going through these cars, and we lost all of that. So that's my rant on T-wings. Moving back toward the rear wing, finally, something that's conventional on this car. Yep, it's the rear wing. It has that raked back profile, as we saw in every car in 2017, because the rules makers said, yes, you must. So they did. Rear wing main plane. You can see 2 flap elements there. We have the main plane and then the upper flap, which is also your DRS flap. The DRS is not active on this car. It's fixed in place. We can't adjust the flap angle. We can't open up the slop gap like we could on my SF70H, but you can see the actuator pod is there, as well as the linkage, which actually would move that flap up and down. Very cool stuff to see. Rear wing end fences there. You can see some representations of ductwork, or not ductwork, but slot gaps cut into it. It's just molded into the plastic there, but there is a nice carbon fiber finish on that wing. Right by the E in Epson, you can see some of the carbon weave. That's very nice. I like that a lot. Rear suspension. Here we can see the peculiar geometries of the double wishbone pull rod rear suspension. There you go. You can see the upper and lower wishbones, but you see that slanted element coming up out of the chassis toward the upper wishbone pickup points, well, that is the pull rod. This is operating in exactly the same manner as the push rod front suspension, but in reverse. Rather than the loads being shocked into the car from the bottom up, rather they are actually carried by the rear tire, and obviously it's carried by the dampers in the car, but the motion of this is actually outside to inside relative to the center line of the car versus the front suspension. The motion is actually inside out, if that makes any sense. Basically, the dampers for a pull rod solution are mounted on the bottom, and the dampers for a push rod solution are mounted on the top. So you can take this arrangement, flip it upside down, and you've got yourself a pull rod arrangement. And we have seen Formula One cars with pull rod front suspensions in the past. Nobody seems to be doing that anymore, though. I do very much like all the detail that many chants have bothered to put on this car, though. It's, again, this is the first time I'm looking at it, and I'm not at all disappointed with what I'm seeing. Yes, I know, my name is Ferrari Man, and, well, I like Ferrari, but I can appreciate a good design when I see it, and this Mercedes was definitely a good design, and this model is definitely a good design as well. Let's take a look at the rear end of this. Spin it around, and there we go. Here is the rear. Big, slick tires on the rear of this car. They came back for 2017, and we were all very happy about that. As we look down in the bottom section of the car, there is the diffuser. Not nearly as complicated as other diffusers that we have seen in the past, but pretty large nonetheless. You can see, I would call it a single level diffuser, believe it or not. There's the reference plane on the car down below. That's where the plank is. That's the, there's the actual bottom of the car, the plank there. That's the legality plank. The step plane on either side, the reference plane, is the top section of the diffuser that we see here. Strakes coming down from the reference plane toward the ground. That's just funneling the air as it exits through the bottom of the car. Up through here, we can see the exhaust outlet, if we can focus on it. There we go, more or less. But just to rears of the exhaust outlet, we can see a monkey seat. The monkey seat's also something that have pretty much gone away, but the idea of this was to try to manipulate the exhaust flow a little bit. Obviously, we can't have exhaust-blown diffusers because we only have that one main exhaust outlet. You can see two other pipes on the Mercedes. That is for turbo wastegate exhaust, but the central pipe, that's your engine exhaust that's coming straight out of the turbine, and they're funneling that through the monkey seat, just trying to send that exhaust flow upwards, trying to generate a little bit more rear downforce. Trailing side of the rear wing, pretty conventional, simple as you like, and then there's the trailing side of the T-wing on top. Trailing edges of the rear brake ducts. They've gone pretty crazy with the brake ducts in this era of design. You can see so many different wing elements in there as well, just trying to claw any minuscule amount of downforce that they might be able to get out of any part of the car where they're allowed to do so. It's absolutely crazy. We'll return to the front end for a moment, take a look at the brake ducts on the front, and you can see that effectively there are none. Of course there are, but they don't have the traditional duct profile that we've seen in the past. Think of early 2000s where they just had a duct. It's a box that has a hole in it so air can be rammed through it, and then they're just blowing the inside of the brakes there to cool them down. This is completely different. They're taking that slot gap right ahead of where the tire sidewall is, and they're trying to get that high pressure air inside at the least expensive drag possible. So they've really refined brake duct design. They're moving away from this because they say it's too much of a performance benefit to the teams and it creates too many vortices, so maybe it hurts overtaking too badly, but this is what they were doing. You don't have big ducts on these brakes anymore. They are little slot gaps blowing at very high pressure, trying to cool down those brakes, and of course, if you could exhaust air out of your wheels fast enough, you can also create more vortices and negate the effects of drag even more than you could do with these crazy front wing cascade elements. It's nuts. It's absolutely nuts. But really, I must say, this is a very, very cool piece here by Mini Champs. It's still relatively new. They tend to be about a year behind in terms of when they get the latest Formula One models available to us, because of course these cars tend to be pretty highly regarded trade secrets, but here we are, it's 2019, and we have a Spanish GP spec 2017 car now available from the team that won the Constructors' Championship that year. I do think it's a very nice looking one. Of course, I'm not generally a Mercedes fan, but look, this car won the World Championship for drivers and constructors. It definitely deserves a place in anybody's 1/18th scale Formula One collection, mine none the least withstanding. Therefore, it's here now, and I say it's a very good acquisition. Mini Champs, of course, is always a very safe bet when it comes to model cars, and, well, they have not disappointed me yet again. Definitely Mini Champs. For the price point, they make the best Formula One models you can get today. There are others, but, again, you're going to pay a lot more for those. This one, for about $100 to $150 US, yep, definitely worth it. If you're thinking of this one, go for it. You will not be sorry that you did. That is all I've got for you today, though. Thank you all very much for joining me. Hopefully you've enjoyed this one. Until next time, Ferrari Man 601 saying thank you very much for watching, and of course we will see you soon.